Good afternoon. My name is Rob Romanowski. I'm the Director of Sales Operations for 3HTI. And today we're very excited to have this webinar presentation for you today regarding surfacing within your Creo models. And we have Paul Dye, who is a solutions consultant and applications engineer from the Virtual Center of Excellence at PTC, who is going to take us through a brief presentation as well as a demonstration of PTC Creo's interactive surface design extension. So basically the whole idea with Creo, which is a Greek word or meaning to create, you have within Creo direct modeling capabilities in a parametric setting. And something that maybe some of you may not know, but back in 2008, Hewlett Packard had created their own design software called Co-Create, which was direct modeling software. So you didn't have any parametric capabilities within that. It was really easy to do freeform modeling. Well, PTC had purchased that software from Hewlett Packard in 2008, 2009 timeframe, and then they wrote the code on the Granite kernel that Creo runs on. So what that gives you is gives you capabilities within Creo to create surfaces, designs, ideas very quickly within this idea called freestyle. That code also, the direct modeling capabilities, leads to what's really dynamic within Creo called flexible modeling for making changes to your models very quickly and rapidly. But here we're here to talk about surfacing, and then the interactive surface design helps you to get more intelligence behind your model for downstream manufacturing purposes. So without any further ado, I'm going to have Paul Dye take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Rob, for the introduction. And
Thank you,
thank
Paul.
everybody for hopping on. Yep. So I'm going to be talking specifically today around the interactive surface design extension, kind of a mouthful. I'll probably be calling it ISDX, a little bit easier to say, but some really strong capabilities here, right? Definitely something that I'll be able to go through and show, something I'll be able to help you to understand a little bit more about why exactly it's valuable, right? So it's definitely valuable for a lot of people that are working with any level of surfacing out in industry right now. And before I go through and show anything, before I talk to the specific capabilities, what I really want to do is introduce us by talking through some of the main challenges that we typically see out in the industry, right? First of all, service modeling in general, it typically requires a pretty high degree of skill and expertise to be able to do, right? Normally it requires you to have a pretty in-depth knowledge on how to build out, first and foremost, complex curves, do everything that you need to get to this high quality of surfaces. And what we've really seen is that users kind of struggle whenever they're trying to create that surface geometry, and mainly they're trying to use it with the standard parametric surfacing techniques that you might be used to, right? Regardless of whatever your system you're coming from, it can be very, first and foremost, challenging and also time consuming to go through and lay out all the different parameters, sketches, constraints that you have to lay out. Really limits the amount of flexibility and the creativity that you have throughout the process, right? And tools like Freestyle, like Rob mentioned, really do give you that level of flexibility and kind of the ability to just go through and move things around, but that doesn't really give you as much of the parametric control that you really need, right? We see a lot of companies typically relying on third-party applications to do things like conceptual design, exploring new design ideas. It's definitely an issue, right? And that's what we need to be able to do. We still need to be able to create and evaluate more and more designs throughout that concept phase. A typical user that is using your standard processes, you might only be able to evaluate 3 different designs during the concept phase, right? And that's just simply because it's too difficult to build out concept sketches, reverse engineer physical prototypes. And just on top of all that, we need to be able to take into account styling and aesthetics. You need a clean design, something that's probably going to appeal to a customer, things that are all important, and things that we really built out here with the interactive surface design extension, or ISDX, to really lay the foundation for exactly where this kind of falls throughout the process. I want you to imagine a Venn diagram, right? So on the left-hand side, you have your parametric surfacing techniques that you might have standard in Creo, kind of gives you that level of control and parametric constraints that you can go through and change, but it makes it hard to go through and really make things flexible. And on the other side of this, you have the freestyle tool, which gives you the level of freeform modeling capabilities to push and pull on things, but it doesn't give you that level of control like you might have over in the parametric surfacing tools. And the interactive surface design extension, or ISDX, really is right in the middle of those two solutions, right? It's combining both freeform and technical surfacing into a single intuitive, easy to use environment, putting the focus a lot more back on design aesthetics and shapes rather than having to worry about constantly constraints, parameters, and everything that it takes to build out those services. Now, at its really core, ISDX has been designed for you user to maximize the efficiency and the productivity that you can work at. It's a very intuitive UI. We have a 4-window display that you can work in to build out features from multiple angles. A lot of times that's what you need to be able to do whenever you're working with more complex geometry and surfacing. You're going to be working in the X direction, the Y, the Z. This makes it very easy to go through and make changes from essentially any perspective. You can go through and directly edit any of that geometry. In most cases, it'll start by creating freeform curves. That's kind of the basis for a lot of what you're starting with in ISDX is curve creation. We have a ton of enhanced capabilities for doing this. Things like isoline curves, curve on surface, curve from surface, projection onto another surface, you name it, right? There's a lot of ways of getting this curves built out and also analyzing the curves that you're building out to make sure that they're tangent, a curvature, or even acceleration continuous. And whenever you're building out high quality surfaces, really the quality of your curves, first and foremost, are going to be just as important. So we have a lot of control in that aspect. And from that point, we made the creation and also editing of the surfaces flexible and interactive. You have boundary, loft, blend surfaces, smart curve and surface connections, really just making sure that everything that we build out is going to transition exactly how we need to. One of the big things I want to mention here as well is that we want users to be able to create this sort of free-form geometry at any point throughout the design process. And it's all tied back in with our standard parametric features, right? It means that any change that we make to our surfaces, they're going to update real time any of the design or analysis features that we build from them, right? We're able to work either from 2D or 3D imported geometry. We have a lot of customers that work in the concept design phase, starting from a few different sketches, right? So you're able to bring those in and use that as the base for a design. Or you could also work directly from 3D point cloud or facet geometry. Also makes that very easy to reverse engineer curves and surfaces that may have been created outside of Creo. And before I really go through and show what this looks like, I want to answer one of the main questions that we get, right? Who is specifically ISDX, or the Interactive Surface Design Extension, designed for, right? And to start, the first big group that you really see using this tool is your concept and your industrial engineers. Really anyone that's working in the early to the mid stage concepts of the design, laying out the foundation for a model. But at the same time, it's really for anyone that's working in Creo, right? You have your everyday engineer or designer. Maybe you just need a clean cosmetic shape on the outside of your normal parametric features. Well, use ISDX on top of whatever normal parametric tools that you're using, and you can get to that a lot faster. All right, and with that, we can go ahead and jump into Creo so we can kind of see what this looks like from the workflow perspective. If you have any questions, feel free to drop that in the chat as well. But for our demonstration here, I'm going to be using a data set that we have from one of our customers, Royal Enfield. Specifically, we're going to be working on the handguard assembly. And right now we have this main metal bar that's providing the structure, right? And what we need to do is design a plastic covering that's going to go around that bar. Now, this may have been something that was sketched up initially by one of our industrial designers. And what I want to do is bring in that 2D concept sketch right here into my 3D design environment. This is a pretty typical workflow that we see with designers working in the concept phase. You're taking some of those initial sketches and really using those as the foundation for creating the 3D features here in Creo. And we can go through and work with this very easily, right? We can go ahead also and bring in another sketch here. We're really going to use this as the framework from either, the front or the top down. Go ahead and get that brought in here and aligned. And with any of these sketches, you're able to rotate them, scale them, change the transparency and color of the image. Really just making sure that it's going to align well with some of the hard geometry that we started with there. All right, and that looks pretty good. And once we have those images set up, we're able to go ahead and create some surfaces. I have a curve here in the front for that outer beam. So even if we were to hide that or get rid of it for a minute, we're still able to tie our surfaces back in with that geometry as well. All right, so working here in the Interactive Surface Design extension, we're going to be starting in the Style tab. It's just available up in the Surfaces tab. And we can go ahead first and foremost and start to build out some curves on the model. Curves are really the foundation for the different surfaces that you're going to build in the Style tool. As you can see, very easy to go through and build out here on the model. We can define that better as we go along as well. And at any point, what you're able to do is curvature analysis. This is where we can see exactly how smooth the curves that we built are, especially at any of the points where we might have transitions between curves. We can really start to work with that and smooth them out. And we can go back in that curve, right? If I need to make it align a bit better, we can actually work in what we call a multi-view approach. This allows us to see every change that we're making from multiple different orientations at once. And you could change the size of each of those views. So in this case, really focusing in on the one that we're designing with, but still getting context into those other views while we're making those changes. And a lot of times that's actually very important when you're working in 3D space, right? As you're going through and moving a curve in one direction, well, what is that doing in the Y direction or the Z direction? This makes it a lot easier to see that throughout the process. And really, as we're going through each of these views here, just making sure that that curve is aligning well with those 2D sketches that I started with. Gonna add in points as you see fit, and also have that curvature in view to make sure everything's transitioning well. All right, so let's go ahead and do the same sort of thing down here at the bottom. And what you'll notice is that I can really lay these curves out as precisely or as loosely as I'd like to, but we're able to define the level of detail as we move along here. Now, again, we even have curvature analysis available, or at any point we just switch right back into this multi-view to really get better context into the changes that we're making. And while we're in this edit curve, we can go back in and add in more points very quickly. And while we're moving those points around, you can look at the curvature plot to make sure that every change that we're making here is really doing what we want. And if it's not, just simply go back into any of those views, make whatever changes that you need, but you're much less likely to have issues pop up unexpectedly later on. All right, and this is looking pretty good here. And what I'm going to do now is take a step back here. Once we have our curves laid out, we're going to activate the right plane here, and we're going to create our first planar curve on this model using a couple different reference points on the curves that we have created. And it starts by selecting the curve that we have up at the top here, going down to the middle, and then right down there to the bottom. And once we have that one good to go, we'll place a couple more on here. And in this case here, what we're going to use is the radial planar option. This means that I'll essentially just select a point on one of these curves, and then the plane that's created will be normal to that profile sketch that you selected, and it will intersect those other curves as well. If you'd like to, you can use the curve edit option to move that plane around at any point normal along the curve as well. And we'll do the same sort of thing over here with the third curve here, again, using that radial planar option, and then we can place it over on the right-hand side. All right, now with all of our curves laid out properly, we're good to go ahead and create our first surface. So we'll do that first by selecting the curves that go along the boundary of the surface, and then we can go through and select the controlling curves that we have in the middle there as well. All right, and just like that, we have our first surface built out. And we can keep going on from here. We can focus in the top here and go ahead and start to build out some 3D curves here along our existing curves. It's just going to make sure that the surfaces that we're adding in here up at the top are going to transition well into the surfaces that we already have built out. All right, and that's looking pretty good. And in this case, we'll just go ahead and do the same thing over here on the right-hand side. Just the 4 bounding curves on the region we're going to place that down on. And now we can focus here on the middle section. And it's going to be pretty similar to the first surface that we created there. First thing I'm going to do is add in a controlling curve here in the middle of the region where we want to place that surface. And the main difference is now I want to be able to control the tangency, right? So if you take a look at the menu here, you have a lot of different options for exactly how these surfaces transition between each other. They can be tangent, curvature, acceleration, continuous, and that's either with the curves or the surfaces that you're building out. So you have really exact control over how you want those to transition from one to the next. Right, and we can take a step back here into our multi-view approach as well. And in this case, we can see that we need to move that curve up a little bit forward to properly align with the sketch. And to do that, we can add in a couple of points here just to give us a little bit more control over that curve as well. Also use the bottom view down here to make sure everything's positioned incorrectly. And I think that curve is looking pretty good. So we can go ahead and move forward here and create these middle surfaces. We'll first start by getting the smaller half here using the bounding curves along the outside. Go ahead and get those selected. Make sure the tangency is good on either side. All right, and I think that's looking pretty good. And now with this larger section, I actually want this to be indented in a little bit. So let's go ahead and add in one last controlling curve here. And again, we can make sure that it's going to be tangent to the surface that we just created. If we wanted to, we can pull that curve in just a bit. However, you want to go through and edit that. And with that, we're good to go ahead and create our last surface up here at the top. And while we're defining that, we can define the transition in between any of the surfaces up at any point. You can also add in that controlling curve that we have in the middle there as well. And we're good to go. So that's all finished up at the top. Now we need to go down here to the bottom to essentially repeat that process that we went through and did up at the top. Go ahead and first add in our curve over here on the left. Do the same thing over here on the right side as well. And now with those curves, you can go ahead and place our first two surfaces on either side. And what I'm doing here is creating four-sided surfaces, but you could do more than just four sides if you wanted to. You could just as easily build out lofted surfaces, swept surfaces. There's a lot of options that you're going to have at your disposal at any point while you're working with this. It's really whatever gives you the best way of getting there. And now we're going to come down here and finish up this center section. And as you can see, that quick menuing that I'm using here for defining the tangency and the curvature of while you're working, it's very fast, right? It's one of the main points throughout all these different tools that we have in ISDX, whether it be the multi-section view, the quick menuing. We really created a tool in ISDX that allows you to build out some fairly complex geometry, but do it in a way that takes less mouse clicks, less hassle to build things out, and still have a lot of control throughout that process. And here we're just making sure that our center curve is aligning well with the initial sketch that we started with. There we go. I think that's looking pretty good. All right, and now we can go ahead and fill in our first area down here at the bottom with a new surface now that we made sure that it's aligned well. And we'll do this pretty similar to how we did with the other two surfaces. So first thing I'm going to do is select on the four curves along the outside here. Alrighty. And with that, we'll also still make sure that our tangency is set in the correct direction there as well. And last thing we'll do is fill in this top section here as well. And same as before, we want that area to be indented in a little bit like we had up at the top. So go ahead and lay that out very quickly. And again, very easy to go through and add in that level of control here. That looks good. And with that defined, we'll go ahead and grab our four curves along the outside edge here. Make sure the tangency is good with each of these. So again, process tends to be pretty similar and you're going to be able to get up to speed with this very quickly. Go ahead and select that controlling curve in the middle there. And there we go. Good to go. We have most of our surfaces built out. What we can do at any point really throughout this is do some reflection analysis to see how well things are transitioning. We're going to be looking at these zebra stripes here to see the reflective properties of the surfaces, just to get some insight into the quality of the surfaces. Also lets you see if there's any issues with any of the surfaces that you built out. In my case, I'm looking pretty good. And now that I have the base for my design, we probably don't need those images that we started with anymore. So you can go ahead back here into our view and hide those images for both the front and the top view. And right now, the surfaces that we built out are all separate surfaces within that one style feature. So what we can do now is merge those surfaces together into what we call quilts. If you haven't worked with quilts before, they're essentially a grouping of one or more different surfaces. And once we have them all together here, you can see that we obviously have a little bit of extra material that overlaps some of the hard geometry that we have in the model. So what we'll do is go through here and build out an extruded cut to remove anything in those areas. And now we essentially have everything laid out where we want. We can start by rounding off some of the harder transitions that we have on that surface. And once we do that, we need to remove the area where that handguard metal bar is going to attach back in, right? That metal support bar. Well, in my case, I have a surface laid out here that essentially defines the slot where that bar needs to be located. So we can just use our merge tool here to essentially subtract that slot area from the new surface. We also have another area over here on the side where the cover is going to attach back in with the rest of the assembly. So we can remove that material as well. And from there, we can go ahead and use some rounds to smooth out the hard edges that we have between some of the surfaces. And if you haven't where you use all the rounding functionality in Creo, it's extremely robust, right? So here we can do a quarter round along the outside edge of our front surface. And then here on our inner edge, we'll simply put a constant radius for that round. All right, now that everything's laid out, we can go ahead and take that surface and we can add some thickness to it, which is going to in turn turn this into a solid model. And there we go. We have our model that we could take forward, work around. And what's really powerful at this point is the full associativity that we have from our surfaces to the rest of the parametric features, right? That means that if any of that hard geometry that we use to define our surfaces change, maybe the inner radius of the curve here needs to be decreased slightly. Well, again, as soon as we do that, you can see that if we set to 47, everything's going to update for that, right? So all your features update, everything that we create in ISDX is seamlessly connected with anything else that we do in Creo going forward. All right, so that's the interactive surface design extension. We built out our surface geometry very quickly, and again, had complete full control over that throughout the entire process. All right. And that covers everything that I wanted to touch on. Again, really strong capabilities that we have there in the interactive surface design extension. And we see, at least from the people that are using this out in industry right now, a few different things, right? First and foremost, reduced time to market. You're going to have a lot more productivity and efficiency, especially earlier on in the process of making a design. It's less time that you're going through trying to recreate concept geometry when you're moving into the detailed design. We're designing a price premium, right? We're not only creating very precise manufacturable geometry with this, it's all going to be high quality, very highly aesthetically pleasing products that are a lot more easily differentiated in market, reduced development costs, reduced cycle times, a lot less reliance on physical prototypes for looking to define the styling for a product. And finally, just innovation overall, right? You're able to evaluate a lot more options, be more creative, and still at the end of the day, still getting to the best model possible. A lot of main benefits that we're going to get from that. And again, the other surfacing tools that we have in Creo for freestyle and just the standard parametric surfacing are still very strong, but this is really going to get you to a lot of that geometry a lot more quickly. So really strong tool that we have here. All right, and with that, I could pass it over to you, Rob.
Excellent. Paul, thank you very much. Great job as always, and want to thank everybody for being on today. If you have any questions or need any additional information regarding Creo or Windchill or any other PTC solutions, you can email me by responding to the invitations for these webinars, because if you hit reply, that email will come to me, or you can email us at info@3hti.com. Thanks again for being on, and have a great rest of your week, everyone. Take care.